Hey guys, in this episode, we're going to be talking to Ash Reed, Editorial Director at Buffer, to talk about all the amazing episodic content that these guys have created, from breaking brand to the science of social media, and also, most recently, their audio conference with Wistia called Built to Last. A lot of incredible content from these guys, and I can't wait for you to see how we unpack it together. Check it out. Hey Ash, welcome to the show.
Hey Kareem, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. So for people who may not have heard Breaking Brand before or heard your famous voice before, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, so I'm Ash. I live in the east of England, kind of near Cambridge. That's like the city near us that most people know. And I work at Buffer, which is a social media software company. And and at Buffer, I lead all of our content efforts, which is kind of mostly focused on our blog and podcasts. And yeah, we started podcasting in 2017 with the science of social media, and then produced Breaking Brand last year, which is a show kind of going behind the scenes with like a direct consumer business as they go from idea to launch. And then we held Built to Last, which was an audio first conference with Wistia a couple of months ago in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And I mean, this is something that's slowly becoming more and more of a trend, I feel, these days. But I like to think that you guys were obviously ahead of the curve in terms of even thinking in that direction. Can you walk us through how you guys even decided to start shows to begin with?
Yeah, so content has always been a really big part of what we do at Buffer. The company is like 10 years old this month, and we've pretty much been blogging since day one. A lot of our early customers came when the founding team were just sharing everything that was going on at the company, writing articles about social media marketing. So like content has been a key part of our DNA since the start. And then around like 2017, our blogs were growing, and like search is a big referral of customers for us, but podcasting was also growing, and more and more companies were starting shows, were investing in podcasting as a channel to connect with their audience. And yeah, Brian Peters, who was at Buffer, he is now at Shopify, and Haley Griffiths, who heads up all of our PR and that side of things in communications, they kind of started the science of social media as a way for us to dip our toes into podcasting and see what it could do for Buffer, and to kind of create this show that gave our audience kind of bite-sized social media tips. So, like 15, 20-minute episodes with what you need to know about social this week, or, breaking down tips and tactics like what we share on our blog. And it was a real big kind of success for us. Like, we had the existing audience from our users across email, from our blog that we could market the show to. So there was a great crossover there, which kind of helped us to get initial traction. And yeah, we're now last week we recorded episode 200 of the science of social media, so that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks. And yeah, it averages about 25,000 downloads per week now, over 2 million listens in total since we started. And it's a really important asset for us as a company, because, we kind of think about, or the way I like to think about marketing isn't just like how many people can we reach, but it's how many can we actually build relationships with, how many can we actually get to care about Buffer. And, people spending 10, 15 minutes of their week with us listening to the show is really important, and that's the kind of relationships that maybe you don't build in other ways. And it really helps people to kind of get to know more about Buffer, hear some of the actual voices of the people at the company, and that's all really important in kind of building your audience and like your biggest fans.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, speaking of relationships, and obviously different brands think about this differently, but to what degree do you guys sort of measure success, right, when it comes to building relationships, from people who are, for example, listening to the show as such?
Yeah, so we pay a lot of attention to just like the audience size, so how many people are actually subscribing to our content. And with the podcast, that's just the number of subscribers we have across platforms. We host it on Anchor, which kind of gives us a nice breakdown of like the estimated audience that it assumes subscribes to the show, because it's quite hard to track across every potential podcast app. But yeah, we look at the audience size and then the engagement. So like, of the people that do listen to the show, how many of them actually stick around, and they're not just listening to the intro and leaving. How many will hang around till the end and listen to the whole thing? And that's what's really important to us. Like, we don't try and tie it back to anything more than that right now. Like, we don't focus on how many signups come from the podcast. We do track that. People can say they first heard of Buffer via our podcast, but it's not a number that we are fully focused on. It's kind of more of a media and audience play, and like, how many people can we get subscribing and engaged with this show on whenever we put it out.
Nice, makes sense. And I suppose like this just goes to show that every channel or every medium or every type of content needs to be measured a certain way, and not everything could be measured exactly the same. And I suppose like one of the things that probably people tuning into the show would be curious to know about is if you can now almost like take us back to when these shows originally started. And I definitely have a lot of questions around Breaking Brand as well specifically, but just overall, obviously the shows are very successful for you guys right now, to the point where this level of detailed sort of measurement is not necessarily required, from what I'm understanding. I wonder though, in the beginning, was it different? Were there any do you know what I mean? Like, were there any questions around whether this will take off or not?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning it was kind of more of a question of, will this gain traction? Will this be something that our audience wants? Is it something they're going to care about? And I think it was more kind of focusing on the momentum of the show. So like, can we actually ship this? Back then it was every week. Can we ship this weekly along with all the other stuff we do? And is the audience going to grow? And it was kind of more of just looking for signals that this was going to work, or it would be a good investment for us. So, are people listening to the whole show? Is the audience growing week on week? It's not too dissimilar to what we track now, but I think it was more of a validation of, will these metrics move in the right way? And like, one of the ways that I like to think about content and marketing and what we do, or the stuff I work on at Buffer specifically, is, can we build an audience of people that look like our ideal customers, right? So like I said, we don't necessarily track exactly who listens to the podcast and signs up and what they do within Buffer. Like, we sometimes look at that. We'll look at it as like an idea of are people signing up from the pod, but like, it's not our main metric. And the number one thing I look at is, can we build an audience of people that look like ideal customers, that kind of care about Buffer, and will hopefully help spread word of mouth about Buffer, talk about our shows, share them, discuss them with peers. Because I think that's the goal of content in my eyes, is to just build that audience of people that look like and talk to your target customers. Because the example I always like to use is Basecamp. Like, I'm not a Basecamp customer, but I listen to their podcast and I read their blog and I follow the founders on Twitter. But if you're looking at it through a traditional funnel, I dropped out around awareness or consideration, right? I've essentially kind of wasted spend in their eyes. But if anyone needs a project management tool, I'll talk about Basecamp glowingly because of all of the content they put out and the relationship I have with the brand. So I look at it from that lens, can we just build an audience of people that look like our customers, that will speak, proudly and excitedly and passionately about Buffer and what we do and what we stand for. And that's really the goal of kind of everything that we do.
Yeah, and that ultimately, leads to the holy grail of essentially word of mouth, where it's it's not as simple as, okay, this person listened and they went through the funnel as you mentioned and now they're a customer. It's actually a lot more than that. It's a lot more sophisticated than that. This person has a relationship with our show, with our brand, and they're essentially like a brand ambassador or an advocate as such.
Yeah.
That's really really cool, and it's actually a very it's a very sophisticated definition, obviously, of how to measure ROI from shows. So yeah, that's really powerful stuff, and we're not even 10 minutes in. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, Ash, is breaking brands. I love the concept of the show, and for anybody who has not seen it before, do you want to give us just a quick synopsis of what the show is about and about Jin Lane and the story behind that?
Yeah, so at the highest level, like Breaking Brand is a show that covers like pivotal moments for exciting companies and innovative companies. And the first series is kind of following this like really amazing journey. Like honestly, like we got very lucky that this story came to us, or we discovered this story at the right time, and it all fell into place. But essentially, it tells the story of Jin Lane, who are one of the best branding agencies in the world. Like they are the go-to for consumer startups, or they were the go-to for consumer startups. And they worked with over like 50 brands in their 10-year history. The brands they worked with are now worth a combined like $15 billion. It's kind of just a huge runway of success stories of the brands they've helped build and launch. And the show Breaking Brand like follows them through this period of transition where they actually shut down Jin Lane, which I think in itself is a really wild, interesting story of like how they shut down this hugely successful agency. But then at the same time, they went out and raised some funding and started a consumer business of their own. And we followed them on that journey to kind of see like how did they, why did they want to start this new business? How did they go about it? How did they build their first brand? What did launch look like? And yeah, that's kind of essentially, I guess it's kind of like a Gimlet startup style documentary show, kind of going behind the scenes with some of the world's best brand builders as they launch a brand, which I felt really privileged to be able to be a fly on the wall in some of those conversations and speak to the founders as they were going through those moments.
Yeah, it definitely felt like like the audio version of like a Netflix series that you just listen to, and this sort of like docu-series journey, as you pointed out, especially how as you mentioned, like they were doing so well with their business, and then they've decided to take the same people, same talent, and then you just go and start something completely different from scratch, but something that they really believed in. As an audience, as one of your audience members, like I absolutely love that show, and
Thank you.
I couldn't help though, and I couldn't wait to ask you this question as well. But in your own words, I suppose, like how does a story like this, right, tie back to Buffer? One would argue that, oh well, how obviously there's no necessarily like any mention of Buffer at all. How do you guys even justify building such an amazing show like that without necessarily having a very sort of direct link to Buffer, unless I'm mistaken?
So at the time we were kind of recording this show, so we started speaking about it it was like I think April 2019. We initially kind of started speaking to Jin Lane, and we'd been exploring the idea of a second podcast series anyway. And at that time, the direct-to-consumer industry was like a key area of focus for Buffer. So some of our like best customers are direct-to-consumer brands that push social media as far as they possibly can. So they have huge audiences on Instagram. Everything they're doing is kind of focused on building audiences, connecting with consumers, through channels like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And that was a really important segment for us. But like we weren't necessarily a direct consumer product. We weren't a social media tool for direct consumer brands at that time. And it was kind of like for us as a whole company, we were learning about the direct consumer industry and like how do these businesses operate, what do they care about, what are their marketing focuses, all of these things we were trying to figure out and learn as a company. But then also we kind of needed some like credibility in that space. Like not too many direct consumer business maybe know of Buffer, or they've maybe heard of us, they know us as a social media tool, but they don't know too much else about us. And it was kind of a way to build some credibility in that audience by telling the story and kind of working directly with one of the like standout brands and some of the best, most successful brand builders in that industry. So it was almost like a way for us to get into that space and also internally to learn about how those direct to consumer businesses operate. So, when it comes to like looking at how a show provides ROI for a business, I try and think about as many ways to win as possible. So, it's like, even if no one listened to Breaking Brand, our 90-person team at Buffer got to go behind the scenes with Gin Lane as they transitioned to pattern brands and launched a new brand to market. And we got to kind of learn from them and see exactly how that situation plays out, how they act, how they come across, like what problems they come across, how they solve those problems. And that's really, really valuable on its own. Like, I got to spend 8 or 10 hours like interviewing the founders, speaking to them, learning from them. We got to hear what they were doing behind the scenes, what they were working on. So like that in itself was really valuable. And then, secondly, the main goal is, can we build this audience of direct consumer marketers that, now know what Buffer is. They maybe have some more trust for us from listening to this series. They've spent over an hour of their time consuming this content. That's really, really powerful. And like, it was a great way, I think, to kind of announce that we were in this space now, that, Buffer is a tool of consideration for direct consumer brands. And, like I said at the start, it's like, building that audience that look like our target customers. And at that time, direct consumer brands were our target customers. And, this series was a way to kind of build that audience in a genuine way and just produce something really high quality that hopefully, that audience would care about. And I think the story was so great in itself that it just felt like, people were going to care when we released this.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I love the fact that there was, I love your concept of creating as many ways as possible to win, because, it just shows that obviously, you guys are of course genuinely interested in that actual story in all cases. And of course, it would make for a great story to tell in the form of the docuseries or the podcast as such. But I love just this mindset even of coming up with additional ways and as many ways as possible to win from that, which is incredible. I think I came across a post on Medium once with, I forget the author now, unfortunately, but it was like an encyclopedia of all the digitally native vertical brands, or DNVBs as they call them. So like Bonobos and all the other guys, and like Allbirds and all the like really cool brands who are doing, cool stuff in that space. And I have to say, it's just such a creative way of going after that, and I suppose like when it came to, so just shifting gears a little bit, when it came to actually producing the show, how did you guys produce that show? And do you have any, I guess for a two-part question, the second part is, do you have any insights or learnings on how you do this again, let's say in the COVID world that we're kind of living in at the moment from a production standpoint?
Yeah. So I think, like the way it came about was it was kind of like a happy accident, I guess, or a happy coincidence. But,
Bob Ross.
We'd been exploring launching a second series, but we didn't really have a topic in mind. There was just like various notes and ideas floating around. And then one day, like as we were kind of focused on this direct consumer industry, I just emailed Emmett, who's the co-founder of Pattern Brands and Gin Lane and one of the stars of the Breaking Brand series, and just said, I want to learn how you approach building brands at Gin Lane, and it's for a story on our blog. Does this sound of interest? And we emailed back and forth a little bit, and then one day Emmett just kind of said, can you just give me a quick call? And I phoned him, and he told me this whole like story. We're we're shutting down Gin Lane, we're launching Pattern. Maybe there's something bigger we can do here.
Oh, wow.
We've never really shared much about how we build brands before. And I remember like hanging up from that call and then just instantly excitedly going to Slack and writing, I just had this conversation, like this could be our second podcast series. And once it kind of got the go ahead, like the main thing just like flashing through my mind was, don't mess this up. Like this is a great story. It's an opportunity that you're not going to get, you might not ever get a story this good again. So in terms of production, like the first thing to do was find people that know what they're doing. Like we produce the science of social media in-house. We've, been self-taught in doing that, but the science of social media, which is kind of like a weekly, like interview show or, a couple of hosts discussing social, like it's not that hard of a concept, but it's very, very different to producing like a fully fledged documentary that kind of needs like shooting, recording on location. And, no one at Buffer knew how to do that, right? Like I don't know how to book a recording studio. I don't know how to find, like audio engineers on the ground in New York that can go behind the scenes. I don't really know how to structure a documentary. So yeah, the first thing was just like, don't mess this up, hire professionals. And we went to a podcast agency in London called Message Heard. They were really great and kind of helped us to map out exactly what the story should be. Also kind of, I think, just introduced us to the way to produce podcasts properly in terms of like, organizing pre-interviews with all of the subjects, where we need to get additional voices into the story, how we can kind of make it more than just a set of back and forth interviews between like me and Emmett and Nick and Camille, who are, in the show. And that really, really kind of like opened our eyes to how to produce a documentary show and how to go about doing it.
Yeah.
And I think, like that whole experience was really eye-opening. It was great. And, we definitely couldn't have done it without Message Head's help. I think like going back to if I was to do it again, one of the things that I would do differently, or one of the learnings, is kind of like focus on the messaging up front. So, I think I got very excited about Breaking Brand, the story, like what it was that was like exciting. And I kind of felt like, we'd get everything done, then we'd think about how we launch it, what the messaging of the show is. And then like, after we got it wrapped, it was like, oh, we're launching in 2 or 3 weeks. Now's the time to get all of the messaging done. And I would kind of do all of that up front. And it's something that we did with Built to Last, the conference with Wistia. Like the first thing I did as soon as we decided to kind of move ahead with this project was, why should anyone care about this event? Why would people want to attend? What are they going to learn? Like, how are we going to sell this to people? How are we going to promote it? And just kind of thinking of all of that messaging and communications before we even start recording anything. And I think with, Breaking Brand, it was kind of like, this is happening, get the team, start recording, and it kind of just like snowballed and it happened. But if I was doing anything like this again, I would definitely kind of make space in that process to kind of sit down right at the start and say, I think, we knew what the series was going to be, so that was also a help. Like I didn't need to come up with this like synopsis or concept from scratch, but I think just kind of writing down like, what is the description of this show going to be? What's the landing page copy going to say? All of that, and doing it up front, I think just like would have really, really helped to kind of make the launch even better. So that's my big learning, was just like the messaging and all of that comes first, and then kind of jump into recording and everything else.
Understood. Makes sense. And I suppose like you touched on the audio conference that you guys did with Wistia. So I suppose this could be related to that, but even just in general, what's your philosophy, I suppose, towards like distribution and actually promoting that content and repurposing it as such? Once, because of course when we build something, people won't necessarily come. They usually don't come. And so how do we actually, now that the body of work is complete, how do we actually start to, or how do you guys start to actually, drive attention to that in that sense?
Yeah, so I think, we've built to last. It was, yeah, before we did start recording, we'd kind of planned out, how we'd go about it. Like partnering with another brand was a big part of the distribution strategy. It was, like who do we know, or what brands do we know that we could work with on this, that kind of have the same values, the same vision for content that we do, and can help us reach the right audience. So I think like right out of the gate, that was a big distribution channel for us, because not only were we promoting it to all of our own channels at Buffer, but Wistia was promoting Built to Last across all of its own channels, across its website, email, social, all of these things. So like, distribution was built into the partnership. And then I think as well, it's kind of, then once we'd started doing the recordings, how do we, like create different previews? How do we chop up talks into like short clips and video and like visuals and quotes and like all of these things? Like I don't think any of it was really like rocket science. Like I don't think we have a secret sauce for how to go about doing this, but it's just kind of taking, I think, what you have and making the most out of, every piece of content. So, one of the ways I do think about Built to Last was, we had 6 conference sessions, all with like really awesome speakers talking about, how to build a brand that can stand the test of time. And now we have that, like we've got that forever. Like that's not really going to go out of date. Even the same with like Breaking Brand, like it's not, the series is a year old, but we're still talking about it now. It's something that we can continue to promote, because like it's not a timely piece of content. It will always be worth listening to. And, we have these assets, and, Built to Last, like we haven't really even like scratched the surface of what we could do with that content. So we had the conference a couple of months ago, but, we're still yet to actually chop all of the talks up into blog posts. There's probably about 20, 30 blog post ideas we can get from that. There's tons of clips that we can cut and share across social. Even releasing it publicly as its own series. So it was like a kind of register only conference where you had to sign up, and like it was gated, so only signups could listen to the podcast. But yeah, it kind of gives us a wealth of content. And like, even if, we don't directly create a bunch of content using quotes from Built to Last, I think it's there to fuel ideas for the rest of this year and kind of going into next year. There's so many subjects that we can talk about off the back of that conference. So yeah, I would say with either, we haven't really scratched the surface of what we should be doing, but it is there. Like I think a series is kind of like fuel to the fire. So, whenever we need some content put out, like we've got this, this, backup of fuel that we can throw on it whenever we need. Like we're not going to be short of ideas or ever scrambling for something to say.
100%. And I mean, just to add to that as well, like I love the notion that of whether it's Breaking Brand or Built to Last with Wistia, or even the science of social media, like all these shows, they're obviously evergreen content by design. And so, as you said, it's a very easy way to add, fuel to the fire when it comes to creating more content that's based off of these assets. Not to mention, these new assets could obviously drive attention back to the original series and get more people sort of binge watching that or binge tuning into that. So yeah, it's amazing how that works, because it's also a realization that that we've arrived at, which is one of the best things or most effective things you can do from like a thought leadership or brand awareness perspective. In a way, is also like one of the most efficient things you can do, just because you're creating longer form pieces of content and storytelling that you can actually tap into later on to create a lot more assets from that. So yeah, that definitely makes sense for sure. All right, and I suppose in terms of I was also really looking forward to asking this question, like, what's next for Buffer? Like, now that you guys have achieved so much success with your shows, how do you guys think about the future and now having that knowledge, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's for me kind of more of, I guess in a way more of the same, but also like how do we systemize things? How do we make things easier?
Hmm.
So this year, Built to Last was, the first audio conference that we've worked on. I think like one of the first in the industry. Like I
Oh
haven't
yeah,
seen too many similar.
yeah,
But like the first one, maybe it won't necessarily be the hardest, but like next year, hopefully there's some lessons we can learn to make it better and, maybe systemize some production things so it's not inventing everything from scratch again. I think like that's one thing. Is just like how do you take what you've done and make it simpler. Like producing a conference like that is always going to be hard. It's a real like pain. I had many days where we'd pitch speakers and hear nothing, and I just wonder like why we even decided to do this. But it's worth it in the long run. And like
yeah.
I think next time, like how do I systemize outreach to speakers? How do I make that better? I think that's really important. And then in terms of like what's ahead for us, I think personally anyway, like I would like to keep continuing to push the boundaries of like what branded content is. I think like Breaking Brand was hopefully a good example of that, where it's just like not a show you would expect from a company. And
Right.
I'd like to kind of keep doing that. I think like blurring the lines between just like even entertainment, but like shows where you can learn something, you can have a bit of fun, you can like get lost in it. Um,
Hmm.
just kind of make bingeable stuff that people want to spend time with, rather than just kind of using the same formats that most shows are, which is fine. Like it works for us for the science of social media, but
Hmm.
I like to kind of look at what's popular, what's on the front page of Apple Podcasts, what are the brands like Wondery and all of Gimlet producing, how are they pushing the boundaries, and
Hmm.
what does that look like from a brand perspective? And another thing that I'm personally really excited to kind of keep thinking about is like how do we almost like break down that fourth wall of what a company is, right? Because I think now consumers really care, like functionally, they care what your business does. Your business needs to solve a problem for them and it needs to solve it well. But beyond that, I think more and more consumers are caring about the people behind the brand, what the brand stands for, why do
Yeah.
they do what they do, what's the founder story, what's the bigger story, the vision behind the business. And I think audio is a great way to share that.
Hmm.
And I would love to kind of produce shows that really put a stake in the ground and say, this is what Buffer is, this is what we care about, this is why we exist, this is why we do what we do. And, that kind of helps people to get to know our team and the vision behind the business,
Hmm.
alongside hopefully creating a show that they'll care about. But, um, like when I think about the companies I really follow and care about, like you do know the founder story, you get to know people behind it, they're very transparent in how they operate. And
Hmm. Yeah, you feel
I
you
think
feel like you've
that's
known them for a long time, essentially, like just by
yeah,
seeing their content. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's really important. So yeah, I guess like to sum up that ramble of what's next, yeah, I'd say one is like systemizing, trying to make systems that make producing these shows easier, less time intensive,
Hmm.
and more rewarding. Then second is kind of just like pushing the boundaries, trying to do new things, trying to kind of take inspiration from Netflix and Apple TV and Wondery and Gimlet rather than what other brands are doing. And
Hmm.
then the third thing is just like breaking down that fourth wall and really helping people to have a relationship with Buffer and the people that drive Buffer and our vision for, the way we see the world.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that so much. It resonates with me on such a deep level. Like one of the analogies that we like to think of is almost I don't know if you've seen the movie Anchorman, with
Yes.
Will Ferrell and everybody else. We like to think of it as almost every, and I'd say Gary Vee probably was one of the people that kind of pioneered this concept, but this notion of thinking of every company as a media company, or as we like to say, like every company as a TV network of sorts, where it's a collection of personal brands, to your point, who take you back behind the scenes of that company. And yes, this is our company, this is the problem that we solve, these are our products and services, but like it really is about the why you do something, as Simon Sinek would say. And I mean, one of the easiest ways to build that rapport is to actually stop hiding behind the logo and actually get your people out front to actually share these stories, and to show that they genuinely are human brands, and brands that are not necessarily focused on just their products and services, because sometimes brands would start shows, but they're not necessarily adding anything new to their narrative, in that sense. One of my absolute favorite examples is MailChimp and their platform, or their sort of media platform, which is MailChimp Presents, and just how far they go away from what's like obvious to do. For example, they have a series called Y Finders, which basically documents stories of, I suppose, like solopreneurs and just people who are just like digital sort of like freelancers working around the world. All they need is a Wi-Fi connection, or like, for example, if you think of Atlassian and their show Teamistry, where they talk about how this whole notion of the lone genius, or like this one person who's going to figure it all out, is essentially a myth. And even some of those people behind the scenes, they're part of a much larger team that's equally responsible for the success as such. And it's incredible to of course see you guys lead the way in that regard as well, in terms of storytelling. Ash, thank you so much for your time today. I guess, do you have any final thoughts to say on the whole topic of creating shows in general that you'd like to leave our audience with?
I think just to kind of, I guess to round things out here, I would just say, like, think about what you actually want to say with a show. Like, instead of just producing it for the sake of it, I think, like, because everyone else is doing it is kind of the worst reason to start a show or a series or podcast, whatever. I think before you start, just kind of think about that like message and actually have something to say, like have a genuine point of view or perspective or something to add to the conversation.
Right.
Before you start. So have something to say and start from there.
Definitely. Perfect. Ash, thank you so much. And where can people find Breaking Brand and the Science of Social Media?
So pretty much all podcast platforms, just search Breaking Brand or Science of Social Media, and we actually have like a little microsite for Breaking Brand, but the best place to find it is probably just like Google Breaking Brand, and you'll see our microsite at the top there. That has links to all of the episodes, and if you do give it a listen, we'd love to hear what you think.
Perfect. All right, Ash, thanks again for your time, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Kareem. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.